Peace, peace, peace. Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the Tiffany French channel. This your girl Tiffany coming here live in effect. Today's topic will be dealing with Black history, and the topic of today is Ruby McCollum. So the story about Ruby McCollum centers around the concept of race, sexism, classism, injustice, and sexual violence towards Black women. Now, what's interesting is Ruby McCollum was a wealthy woman. Okay, she was a housewife that came out of Live Oak, Florida. But she had encounters with a white doctor, and his name was his name was Dr. Leroy Adams. That was his name, Dr. Leroy Adams, who was a community doctor. Now, it was segregated because he dealt with colored people for the most part, or now today, African Americans. Okay, so that was his field, and he was also running for politics. He was getting ready to work his way into becoming the governor of Florida. All right. But the story becomes interesting because Dr. Adams was a privileged white man. And he had the privilege, meaning that he was able to use what's called Paramore Rights. And what is Paramore Rights? Paramore Rights was a practice that white men was able to get to gain sexual favors from Black women. Meaning that if they want to have sex with a Black woman, they can do it at all costs. There was nothing to stop them, even if she was married. Okay, this practice go way back to slavery. All right, but it was still continue to practice, and that was his case. Now, many people thought that their relationship was consensual, or at least that's what it looked like, but it really wasn't very consensual because in Ruby's mind, she felt like she was being psychologically controlled. So she thought that if she didn't give into the will of Dr. Adams, that he was going to take it from her anyhow. So that was one of the reasons why she engaged into sexual activity with this white doctor, because she didn't want to be forced to do so. But when she stopped and she didn't want to do it anymore, then it got worse. Because it not only went from having sex with this woman, but she ended up having 2 kids by him. And that was nothing her husband could really do about it. So what did she do? She took it upon herself to go take a visit to that doctor's office. She had her gun in her hand, and she shot this man. She shot and killed him. Now, at that time period, if you're a Black person killing a white person, especially if you're a Black woman, and you killed the white man, that was going to start an uproar in the community. That means that not only the white residents was going to protest, but you had to deal with the Ku Klux Klan. And the Ku Klux Klan had a very strong tie with the white community, okay? Because, of course, they were white. And a lot of them was working in the professional field. A lot of them were doctors, lawyers, policemen, firefighters, whatever you name. That's what they were. So if you killed one of them or their own, there was going to be some serious consequences that you had to face. But luckily, the whole city did not go up in flames or whatever. But many Black people was in fear for their life because this Black woman killed a white man. And many white folks was ready to go to war. But, it's very ironic. And I'm not here to make any type of justification behind either one of this. But it's very ironic that if a Black man was to rape a white woman, that he would be killed automatically. or he would be lynched. And the white mobs would attack the black community. But if a white man rapes a black woman, then nothing really happens to him. He can get away with that. So this is the patriarchal white supremacy that was dealt with during that time period. Now, although they say they have done away with a lot of things, but it's still, the ideology is still there on the low key. The mentalities are still there. Yeah, you can change up some of the laws, but guess what? Once you condition the people, that's how they're going to continue to think until the cycle has been broken. But a lot of the cycle has not been broken, especially when it comes to the older generations that was around during that time period. They are fixated on the mentality they have because that's how they grew up. They grew up in the time of Jim Crow. They grew up in the time of Jim Crow and the Civil Rights era. So they fixated on that mentality. It's already programmed in them. So you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. And that's the saying goes. So when it comes to the old generation, especially old generation white folks, you can't really decolonize their mindset. You can't make them not see racism. And it's the same way with the generation of old black people, the old generation of black people. They gonna see racism regardless because of what they experience, especially if it's something very traumatic. All right. But anyways, I want to get into the story, and I want to also share some information for you guys so you can look at some reading material. Okay. And I'm going to talk about the documentary as well. So let's go ahead and let's look at this information. All right, so I am on Wikipedia, which is Wiki1, same difference. Ruby McCollum was born Ruby Jackson on August 31st of 1909, and she died on May the 23rd, 1992. She was a wealthy, married African-American woman in Live Oak, Florida, who is known for being arrested and convicted in 1952 for killing Dr. Leroy Adams, a prominent white doctor and state senator-elect. The judge restricted her testimony, but she did testify as to her sexual relationship and his paternity of her child. The judge prohibited her from recounting her allegation that Adams had repeatedly raped her and forced her to bear his children. Yes, you read that right. And you heard that right. She was sentenced to death for his murder by an all-white jury. The sensational case was covered widely in the United States press, including press report written by Zora Neale Hurston, as well as by international papers. McCollum was subject to a gag order. Her case was appealed and overturned by the state Supreme Court. Before the second trial, McCollum was examined and found mentally incompetent to stand trial. She was committed to the state mental hospital, which is Florida State Hospital now, at Chattahoochee, Florida. In 1974, her attorney, Frank Cannon, obtained her release under the Baker Act, as she was not considered a danger to herself or others. In the 21st century, McCollum and her case received renewed attention with books and 4 film documentaries exploring the issues of race, class, sexual violence, gender, and corruption in local politics from a modernist perspective. McCollum's case is considered a landmark trial by these people in the struggle for civil rights, as they believe she was the first Black woman to testify against a white man's sexual abuse and paternity of their child. It is considered to have helped change attitudes about the practice of Paramore Rights. And for those of you that don't know Paramour basically means, the word paramour in itself deals with relationship with somebody that is married. But in this case, Paramore Rights mean that the white man having the right to engage into sexual activity with a Black woman that is married, whether he gets consent from her or not. But anyways, McCollum's attorney, Rutherford McGriff, became part of a team who worked to change Florida's Jim Crow practice of selecting all all white juries. Black people were still disenfranchised at the time and thus not eligible to serve as jurors who were limited to voters. All right. All right, so let me go ahead and continue. So her early life, she was born to Gertrude and William Jackson in Zubert, Florida. She was the second child and first daughter among her 6 siblings. They attended local segregated schools. Ruby's parents recognized her intelligence and sent her to a private school, Frisenden Academy, where she excelled in bookkeeping. Right, and her marriage was in 1931. Ruby Jackson married Sam McCollum. They moved to Nyack, New York, as part of the Great Migration of rural blacks out of the South in the early 20th century. The couple had 4 children together: Sam Jr., Sonia, Kay, and Loretta. McCollum later said that her youngest, Loretta, was a biracial child fathered by Dr. Leroy Adams in a forced relationship. All right. So business activity in 1934, the couple relocated to the area of Fort Myers, Florida. Sam's brother, Buck McCollum, had amassed considerable wealth managing a bolita gambling business. Sam went into business with him and was reported to be a player in North Florida crime, including gambling and liquor sale. Now, during that time, that was the Prohibition era because liquors was prohibited. Okay, and gambling was considered as illegal, and it still is illegal in certain places. But anyways, these were illegal in the county, but flourished because of payoffs to local law enforcement. And a related sideline, the McCollums also sold burial policies and owned a local funeral home. By the 1940s and in early 1950s, the McCollums were reported to have amassed a fortune based on their criminal activities. Sam and Ruby own a stately 2-story home in Live Oak, Florida, a small town of 4,000 people, which they acquired from the prior bolita operator in the county when he was run out of town. Ruby McCollum drove a new Chrysler automobile each year. The McCollums owned several jukes, served illegal liquor, collected money from the jukeboxes, and had a farm outside of town with the largest tobacco allotment in Florida. It was at this time that Ruby developed an addiction to heroin. The McCollums also owned a farm near Lake City where Sam stocked fields with quail for hunting with his prized bird dogs. Ruby McCollum was described as the wealthiest black woman in town. The couple was considered financially successful and well respected in the community, where they contribute liberally to their church. Their son and oldest child, Sam Jr., had started college at UCLA by 1952. So the story of a young African-American couple generating wealth is not very common to hear. But she was very well successful. She had the life that she wanted. She lived in the nicest neighborhood. So they weren't dealing with too much problem of racism, although it was segregation going on, but they were still able to maintain business, be able to send their kids to school, all that great stuff. So she couldn't really complain. But what did she have to complain for? She got the life that she wanted. She was able to live a happy life, but it came down to an end when she encountered this white doctor. But let me go ahead and continue. Now, Florida was a segregated state where black people had been essentially disenfranchised since the turn of the century amid passage of a constitution and laws imposing poll taxes, literacy tests, and other barriers to vote registration and black voting. The exclusion from voting meant that African Americans could not serve on juries, and they were generally excluded from any political office. The white Democrat The white Democrat, and I say that 3 times for a reason, dominated state legislature following Reconstruction had passed laws to create legal segregation and Jim Crow. African Americans were kept in second class status until passage in the mid 1960s of civil rights legislation, following their decades of activism and support from the National Democratic Party led by President Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson was a racist his damn self. If anybody go back and look at the story about Eartha Kitt, you will learn about Lyndon Johnson. He was the reason why she got blackballed. But anyways, the power relation of many white men taking sexual advantage of black women had a long history dating to slavery times, when enslaved women were frequently raped by white slaveholders. And I'm highlighting this for a reason. Okay, so when you see this right here represents the Paramore Rights, where it says the power relation of many white men taking sexual advantage of black women had long history dating to slavery times. That's Paramour Rights. From the late 17th century, Virginia and other colonies established laws that children of enslaved mothers were also born into slavery regardless of their paternity, under the principle of partis sequenter ventrum, an assumption that powerful white men could take black women as sexual partners regardless of the woman's desire or social status, continue to underline many 20th century relations. This was called Paramour Rights at the time of the trial. And again, right here, that paragraph is highlighted. Okay. Dr. C. Leroy Adams had a reputation as a benevolent and popular doctor who administered to the needy. In 1952, he was elected to the state senate. His associate, Dr. Dillard Workman, campaigned for him. Adams was considered to have a potential political figure as governor. Political future as governor, Workman was Ruby's McCollum's physician when she was pregnant with Adams' child. He performed the autopsy on Adams and testified to McCollum's sanity during her trial. All right, so then it goes down to talk about the shooting of Dr. C. Leroy Adams. Ruby McCollum met Dr. C. Leroy Adams, a white physician and state senator-elect, in his office in Live Oak, Florida. She had driven there with her 2 young daughters. She later admitted that she shot him 4 times with a revolver and said it was because he would not agree to leave her alone. She said that over a period of years, he had repeatedly forced her to submit to sex and to bear his child. She claimed that her 2-year-old daughter, Loretta, was fathered by him. In notes and letters, McCollum said that Adams had abused her and that she was pregnant with another child by him when she killed him. She also said that Adams took part in her husband Sam's illegal gambling operation. An employee at the doctor's office later described seeing the doctor accept large deliveries of cash in examination rooms. McCollum was arrested and taken to the state prison 50 miles away. This was temporary and for her protection, according to contemporary accounts. The first day after her arrest, her husband Sam died of a heart attack in Zomba, Florida. He had taken her children there he had taken their children there for safekeeping with Ruby's mother. So these are the list of trials that taken place. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph of these trials. So McCollum was defended by Frank Cannon, a district attorney from Jacksonville, Florida. The case was prosecuted by state's attorney Keith Black and presided over by Florida's Third Circuit Court Judge Hall W. Adams. He was not related to the doctor, but had been an honorary ball pallbearer at his funeral. It was an all-white jury, some of whom had been Dr. Adams' patient. As blacks were disenfranchised, generally not registered to vote, they did not qualify for the jury pool. Zora Neale Hurston, a black anthropologist and writer on the assignment from the Pittsburgh Courier, was the first person to report on the trial for a newspaper outside of Florida. She was required to sit upstairs in the segregated gallery of the courtroom. There were likely Ku Klux Klan members attending the trial. Her coverage helped the McCollum's case gain a national and international audience. All right. And so it goes on to say that McCollum testified that Adams had raped her, that he raped her in her home and in his office located immediately across the street from the courthouse, and that he insists that she bear his child. The court prevented her defense attorney from presenting more complete information about their relationship. And then go down with, according to Zora Neale Hurston, who reported on the trial for the Pittsburgh Courier, Ruby was allowed to describe how about 1948, during an extended absence of her husband, she had in her home succumbed to the sexual assault. She was allowed to state that her youngest child was his. Yet 38 times, Frank Cannon attempted to proceed from this point. 38 times, he attempted to create the opportunity for Ruby to tell her whole story and thus explain what were her motives. 38 times, the state objected, and 38 times, Judge Adams sustained these objections. So in other words, as a black person, you could not testify against a white man, or you couldn't testify against a white person. Even if you had evidence, you could not testify against them. So therefore, that means that in the all-white jury and that white judge, Dr. Adams was innocent, regardless of what anybody say, regardless if there was proof or not, he was automatically innocent. So they already had it predetermined what his fate was going to be. But he was dead, so they already had that predetermined that, yeah, whether he did it or not, she killed this man, and we want to lock her up. So it didn't matter at that point. It don't matter. In their eyes, it wasn't justifiable. But to Ruby, it was justifiable because it was an act of self-defense. It was at the point where she said, look, I don't want to continue on with this sexual relationship. And the doctor said, well, guess what? I'm going to continue, and you ain't got the right to tell me no, or I'm going to take what I want. Okay. But... and it says, Hurston writes that defense attorney Frank Cannon, frustrated by the court's upholding the state prosecuting attorney's objection to most of the evidence he tried to introduce about McCollin's relationship with Dr. Adams, turned to Judge and said, may God forgive you, Judge Adams, for robbing a human being of life in such a fashion. While this is written by Hurston and quoted by Hugh, there is no record of the statement in the trial's transcript. Hurston reported that Thelma Curry, a witness, was told to leave the witness stand and go back where she belongs. This does not appear in the trial transcript. All right, so skipping down, it says, the prosecuting attorney said that McCollum had shot Adams in anger over a dispute bill. In an account supported by 3 witnesses during the trial, McCollum testified that she had discussed a bill with Adams that day, but maintained that she fired at the doctor in self-defense when he attacked her. The prosecution questioned this, pointing out that Adams was 100 pounds heavier than Ruby McCollum, and all of the shots were fired into his back. Residents of Live Oak knew that McCollum was a wealthy woman, and she and her husband were known to pay their bills promptly. McCollum was convicted by the jury of first-degree murder on December 20, 1952. She was sentenced to death in the electric chair. And her case was appealed during the period before the appeal was decided. McCollum was held in the Suwannee County Jail. Her conviction and death sentence was overturned on a technicality by the Florida Supreme Court on June 20th of 1954. The court cited Judge Hall W. Adams, the presiding judge, for failing to be present at the jury's inspection of the scene of the crime. Okay. Now, let's continue on the second trial. So, concerning her mental health, defense attorney Frank Cannon arranged for McCollin to be examined in the county jail where she had been held for about 2 years. At the second trial, he entered a plea of insanity upon receiving the result of an examination of McCollin by a court-appointed physician, including Dr. Adams' associate, Dr. Dillard Workman. The state attorney Randall Slaughter agreed to the appeal. All right, and it says that she was held at the Florida State Hospital at Chattahoochee, Florida, until 1974, when her attorney, Frank Cannon, successfully filed for her release under Florida's recently enacted Baker Act. It allows release of mental patients who were not judged to be a threat to themselves or the community. All right, so I'm going to skip all of this. Then let's go further down. As a matter of fact, I want to read this last part. It says, so it goes on to talk about journalist William Bradford Huey. And it says, Huey says in his updated fourth edition of his work in 1964 that he was denied entrance to the Florida State Mental Hospital in Chattahoochee, Florida, where Ruby McCollin was held. Jet magazine reporters visit Ruby McCollum there in 1958 and published their interview with her. Huey never interviewed McCollum. And then there was a book right here. It says in 1960, they had discussion about Kazan's directing a film to be adapted from Huey's book and entitled The Ruby McCollum Story, while other films based on Huey's book were produced in 1960s and later none was made from his account of the Ruby McCollum story. So William Huey wrote a book called The Ruby McCollum Story, and which came out in 1956, and it was an account of her life and what was like for her to go through trial and how she ended up in the mental hospital. And then later on in years, it says McCollum lived after her release in a rested home in Silver Spring, Florida, funded by a trust set up by author William Bradford Huey. He had paid for her $40,000 for the movie rights for a film feature, which he hoped to have adapted from his book about the case. And McCollum was finally able to see her children again. Sam Jr. had been convicted in 1975 in federal courts on 10 counts of gambling. He had been living in McCollum's homestead, from which the FBI confiscated $250,000. They later returned a good portion of it to him after the IRS deducted appropriate taxes and penalties. McCollum's daughter, Sonia and Kay, both married and lived in Ocala, Florida. Kay McCollum Hope died in a car accident in 1978, and Sonia Wood died of a heart attack in 1979. So she lost two of her daughters. And in November 1980, Al Lee of the Ocala Star-Banner interviewed McCollum at the rest home in Silver Spring. Lee wrote that McCollum had no memory of her ordeal. He reported that psychiatrists said that she may have suffered Gazer syndrome or the suppression of painful memories. In those years, the state mental hospital at Chattahoochee was investigated more than once over issues of patient treatment. overuse of medication, including thorazine, and the administration of electroshock therapy, which can affect memory. So on May 23rd, 1992, at 4:45 a.m., McCollum died of a stroke at the New Horizon Rehabilitation Center at the age of 82. Her brother, Matt Jackson, had died less than a year before. The family arranged for her to be buried beside him and his wife in the cemetery behind Hopewell Baptist Church in Live Oak. Her name was mistakenly spelled on her death certificate as Ruby McCollum. All right, so it goes on with the aftermath. And here you got the representation in other medias. So you have the references at the bottom, the bibliography, and the further reading. All right, so that's a story about Ruby McCollum, because she went through the painful memories and suffered to the point that she had lost memory of what was going on as far as the whole ordeal, the trial, etc. And her health decayed. She died from a heart attack at the age of 82. However, there's a book. There's one of the books that I found, which is called Silencing of Ruby McCollin. The Silencing of Ruby McCollin, Race, Class, and Gender in the South by Tammy Evans. Okay, that's Ruby McCollin's right there, the lady that's sitting down. This is a picture of her right here. So this book was written in 2006, but it gives an account on her story and her life. Okay, so you guys can check this out on Amazon. You can download an ebook on this. You can probably check it out at Barnes & Nobles. But yeah, this is her story. This is her life. This is the biography. So I won't go into all of it, but basically it gives more accounts of what she has been through and what she has experienced. All right. That's the read material. And the name of the documentary is called You Belong to Me, Ruby McCollum. So the documentary is called You Belong to Me, Sex, Race, and Murder in the South, which came out in 2014. So you guys can check this out on YouTube. As a matter of fact, I can show you guys the screen real fast. Okay. All right, so this is the middle of the documentary, but this is the name of it, You Belong to Me, Sex, Race, Murder in the South. So you guys, if you want to look into it, you can just go on YouTube and you can rent the documentary for 3 days. I think, yes, for 3 days. So you guys can rent it and you can watch it for yourself. So far, it's pretty good and it's very historical. So I believe that is necessary. But other than that, that's all I have for today. And I thank you guys for watching, for those of you that are watching. And I appreciate you guys sharing my channel, sharing my video. So make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Peace to Brother Centavo. I'm sorry that I did not greet you. So peace to the chat. Peace, Brother Centavo. Thank you for coming through. But anyways, y'all have a good evening. And I will reconnect with you guys later. All right. So later on, I want to deal with the subject about a single mother who committed suicide because she could not raise her kids on her own. So this goes back to the topic about Black women and mental health and this whole strong Black woman ideology. So I'm going to deal with that later on. But until then, y'all take it easy. Y'all be safe. Peace and power and elevation. This your girl Tiffany, and I'm logging off. All right.